Hi and welcome to Dynamics Update. Today is one of those episodes where we actually have a guest, and by we I mean me and Gustav as usual. Hi Gustav.
Hello.
And the guest is actually someone I met far away at the MVP summit in Seattle. Elif, please introduce yourself.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Elif Item. I am an MVP, like Johan mentioned, a recent MVP actually. And I worked in the D365 AX space almost for 15 years. I was working for a partner for many years. I worked as a consultant, then as a project manager, and then I also worked as a director for all of the projects. And currently, for the last, I would say, 7 years, I'm running my own company. And primary focus is training. Basically, we provide online training for FNO and some of the other D365 products. I live in Dallas, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So one of the things I remember when we met in Seattle was actually that one of the other MVPs mentioned to you, just in passing, that Microsoft had changed a very vital part of the UI in FNO, and what we watched then was you going all pale and was like, no,
Yes.
that can't be right. And then they said, yes, it's right. No, that can't be right. So please tell us.
Yes. So I mean, just as a little bit of a background information, when you develop online training for D365 FNO, of course, like you're using all the UI, and we build training materials. Our methodology basically is to create small videos, 2 to 6 minutes in length. So we have hundreds of these videos that we record, and a year later, when some changes happen, that being functionality changes, UI changes, we go back and re-record those videos. So usually what we do is we do a record 1 year and we take a break for 1 year, and then the next year we just redo it again. And we had just finished basically recording all of our 1,200 videos, and I came to the MVP summit, and someone at passing mentioned that, in FNO, they've basically changed the UI where you go back into the back button, or the sliding, the filtering would now slide from the right side instead of from the left side. And it's like, it sounds trivial, like it's not very important. But then I just it was a little bit of a shock, and I'm like, oh my God, because those sort of things really, it's not necessarily super important to functionality, but it makes our courses look dated. So you cannot wait a long time to replace it. I was a little bit more worried. There were also other sort of bigger UI changes, but then I went home after having a couple of drinks at the MEP summit, and then I downloaded the new version, and then I looked at it, and I'm like, okay, this is something that we can add a couple of extra courses and explain in those courses. In your example, the window may, slide from the right instead of from the left. We're in the process of updating our materials, but, functionality wise, it's the same. But it is a constant challenge for us to, to make sure that our materials are viewed most recent by our users.
I was going to say that must be the major challenge nowadays with the evergreen and the changes. I mean, it's one thing staying on top of the change, the release notes to say, okay, this has changed, we should update it, because you could always look at preview, and then, I mean, it makes it easier. Then it's maybe 10 to 20 videos, but in this case, I understand you have to redo a lot, of course, and hopefully no more major UI changes. But I think that topic, like we discussed a little bit before, I mean, how training must have evolved into staying fresh, because back in the day, like in older versions of AX at least, you could pretty much live off an installation training for quite a while, right? That could sustain you for 2 or 3 years at least. But nowadays, if you just do a single set of training, you need to at least reevaluate whatever has been changed within that area, at least every year, right? I mean, there are so many changes in the product.
Yes,
I would imagine.
definitely. And yeah, definitely. A couple of things help us. One is because we're using more sort of like this micro learning strategy and creating these short videos, functionality wise, we can be very, very precise. So if, let's say, something is changed in pricing or something in the journals, let's say a significant change, but we don't necessarily have to redo 3 hours of training. We can pick and choose the individual courses and just re-record those. So that definitely is an advantage to us, as it is an advantage to our customers because they use it exactly the same way by just using it just sort of a focused
Yeah.
video. But I mean, UI is something you cannot, ignore, and it's all encompassing. So it's not like I can choose to update half of it. And I do expect more UI changes are
Yeah.
going to come because, as we all know, that structurally, technologically, they're changing F&O more. So we just need to take it one step at a time and ask a little bit of grace and patience from our customers, that we're trying our best, and really focus on the things that are significantly changed and first, and then move on to the things that are not changed as much.
So
Makes sense.
one question I have is that, do you see a change in the mindset of the users? Because I mean, when we talked about the AX 2012, it was like you can't basically change anything because the users will be confused and it will be hard. But since we do have changes every single month coming in, UI changes, features coming in, and so on, I would think that the users sort of need to be more agile in understanding how the product work, not like being click there, click there, click there, but rather understand how the feature actually works.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a, a mind shift change towards online training. I mean, I think when D365 became a product of the cloud, I think overall the customers who are implementing a product that's on the cloud, that's always going to change, became a little bit more open to also consuming training from an online resource. So I was like talking to a customer a while back, and actually they just had implemented D365 right before COVID. So during COVID, they were like, oh my God, like this was the best thing that we've done, because before everything was on prem. And then all of a sudden COVID happened, everybody started to work from home, and they're like, we are just so happy we have done this just from the D365 implementation perspective. But then they also said, we're also just so happy we did like online training, because then we were able to use it. So I think from an overall perspective, I see a little bit more openness in everybody. I think COVID also, made this a little bit more possible because
Yeah.
everybody started to consume materials online, just not even from D365 perspective, like watching more YouTube videos and learning how to bake bread and things like that. So it's like, I think everybody is a lot more comfortable with watching something and learning how to do. So I think I do definitely see a shift that's helpful towards consuming materials that way. But also, I think what you're talking about, Johan, makes people avoid customizations because of the changes that are happening to D365 continuously. With all, if they extend D365 a lot, then it becomes a pain, right? So they have to
maintain,
retest everything, and finding standard training materials becomes hard. I think they're a lot more averse, which ultimately is good for us too, because obviously we provide standard training. The more standard it is, the more helpful we can be to our customers. Although we do offer custom training solution, I think customers are, again, a lot more inclined to stick with the standard, which is this landscape. I know you guys have been around, but it's very different than what it was 15 years ago. Because 15 years ago, everybody was buying AX to customize it. I mean, literally, just it was
You
being
could do
sold
anything.
that way.
That was a pitch, right? That was a feature. You could
Yes.
basically do whatever you like.
Exactly.
overlayering.
Partners were selling it that way. Microsoft was marketing it that way, but now we're in a completely different world
Yeah.
in which they are encouraged to stick with standard.
Yeah,
And
it makes sense. It made sense back then as well, but the functionality was not up to par in many cases. So you had to do customizations in many areas. That's another thing that's new because the product has matured so much. You can actually there are there aren't many scenarios that you shouldn't be able to at least have a very high percentage of a fit in the standard application that you have, or coupled with an ISV, which is also a very great like combined strategy. If you have a very niche set of like functionality you need, you can probably find an ISV for it in many cases, and they have their own set of training, of course. But another thing that's a difference from back in that, I remember a lot of classroom-led training, which is good in its sense because you get a very like focused set of training, 2 days intensive training of like developer. I did one for AX 2012 development back in the day as well. You were super tired after like 12 hours of X++ training. And it has its place, of course, but I would imagine that nowadays a lot of people coupling with that hybrid workplace setup where you need to do the training, of course, because you need to understand what you're getting into, but you need to do it on your own time. You have to be flexible, right? So if you can put it in a schedule, you have 2 weeks. During these 2 weeks, you need to take this and this and this course. It's much more compatible with the modern workplace and the modern flexibility in the calendar, even before COVID, but even much more so after COVID, of course. At least in Sweden, that's how it looks right now.
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm a big fan of the blended approach. I think neither one of the approaches by themselves are great. Online training, if you're just relying on online training only for a D365 implementation, that's not a great plan. Unless you're doing an upgrade and you have some internal staff that really just truly understands the basic functionality and you're just, adapting them into a new version of, D365. And I think on the other extreme, like the example that you gave, doing everything in classroom is just not the solution anymore. I mean, from the perspective of hybrid work, and we talk about this a lot, the retention rate for a classroom training is about 25%. So whatever you're teaching, if you're teaching a brand new topic to someone, they're only able to retain 25% of what you're teaching them at that moment. So repetition is very, very important. So I think somewhere in the middle is what customers need to figure out how to do. Provide some sort of an online option where repetition is possible. It's convenient. You can do it at your own time, under your hand. If you need it, you can find it easily. But at the same time, also spend some time with people in a classroom, whether it's online or in person. Ask questions, mingle, hash out some of the issues that are in your mind. I think it's important for people to connect with everybody because online training is just not going to give them all the things that they need, especially if they're nervous about their job and how am I going to handle this scenario and that scenario sort of thing. And just having some sort of an instructor in the classroom, I think helps a lot. So now which spectrum of that you go to, I think depends on the company culture. Like when I work with customers, I think some customers are a lot more on the side of classroom training, a lot less online because of their culture. And they tell me, they're like, our culture is very much so like we like to discuss things, like we like to like talk about it. And then you have another culture. It's like, oh, we are doers. Like we this is a company of doers. We learn a lot, we figure it out ourselves. Then they're more inclined to take more online, a lot less in person. They tend to do office hours instead of classroom training. So people can take the online training and then go into these office hours and ask their questions. So I think just being flexible and really knowing your audience and your learners really help.
Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, where do you see the classic like aspect from where I'm coming from with when you do implementation projects and then you do some maintenance where projects, the training aspect of an implementation project normally, and that hasn't changed that much, to be honest, from back in the day. It's like it comes close to go live. We need a training plan. Oh, who is responsible for the training plan? Let's say this guy, and then they have to come up with the training plan, and it always evolves around what you've built from a process perspective. So we need a training for this particular receiving process, and for this particular posting process, we need a training. How do you click it? So as you said, Joanna, it's more like how do you actually click around in the system, right? It's never really oriented around what you need to understand to make the best use of what you actually bought, right? So I think that's where I think it would make more sense. That's important as well, of course, because you need to do what you need to do in the system. That makes sense. But then after like a couple of weeks, at least after go live, when you come into the system, so to speak, that's where you really can gain by understanding the product and understanding especially now with so many added components in the Power Platform around it to like make your work day a little bit more efficient. And I see so many customers where you've implemented and they regression test, they make sure everything works. They're not pretty late version, but if you speak to any individual user, they know about what they're doing in the system. They very rarely understand, okay, I can use a Power Automate here. I can use this to make my life easier. No. So I think that's where now I would really like to put some training into just like understanding what you can do rather than train just what you have to do. Is that something you're seeing, or is it just a dream from
absolutely. I think it's just one of our customers made the comment, and it's true, is that the training doesn't end because you just went live. It's actually, and it comes back to that retention, what I was talking about, or maybe a lot of the times what you find out, maybe learners have retained 40% what you tried to teach them until go live. And then all of a sudden go live happens. One, there's a realization that this is the new world, right? Before there was maybe some delays and this and that, like there was not really a sense of, okay, well, I'm not going to use that system anymore. Now I'm just going to use this system every day. So, so there's a different sort of mindset too within the learners. They're a lot more careful and maybe, a lot more intent in the way that they ask questions. They're really trying to understand like how things work. So I absolutely agree that you need to continue training for X number of months. I mean, I usually recommend 2 months after go live, still continuous training and maybe partial training afterwards to enhance the knowledge, maybe to add things like Power Platform and things like that. But unfortunate thing about what hasn't changed about training budget and allocation in the D365 implementations is that we are still mostly going towards this train the trainer approach. And I'm not against it at all. I think it's easier for partners and to just basically say, we're going to train your core team and your core team is going to train everybody else. It's on paper, it sounds good, but it just almost never works out that way. One of the reasons is those 12 people are also responsible for implementing, and they rarely have time to take on training, build training materials and things like that. But then also what we see is that as soon as there's some need for money in the implementation, the first thing that they cut is the training budget. So it's like the customers are, if they want an extension or if they have to buy like some additional functionality, if we invest another X number of dollars into this, the first thing that they want to cut is
training,
is the training dollars. Now I talked about this a little bit in some other sessions with some other people. What I love is what Canada does, and I think we need to do it for every sort of like D365 implementation. What they have is there's an untouchable fund for every employee for training. And then when they do a project like this, they have to allocate a certain number of money for training, and it cannot be taken away. So then what happens is everybody knows the rules of the game. Nobody can touch it. And then money is not the issue, right? So at that point of time, what you are trying to do is to find the right set of tools, right set of people to provide the sort of training that your team and your implementation needs. So I am seeing more new roles within the organizations, fully dedicated to training, fully dedicated to change management. And the organizations who make that investment also continue to make it towards training. But
Yeah.
we also see more to traditional companies that are not necessarily spending the money or the effort for it as well.
That's my take as well. It's very interesting that you say exactly that. Like, training is always the first thing to go, but at the same time, we've been struggling now for a couple of years with the whole coming version updates to tell everyone that you need to have a test manager. You need to have someone dedicated for that role because you need to do iterative testing each release. And coming from an AX implementation where you basically released maybe one line of code or very like you need to test this particular area, test that, nothing else. Coming to that realization, because I think now when you speak to clients, they are very of course we need a test manager. So, and I think the most successful training experiences I've had is exactly that, where you have allocated set of funds. The funds is not an issue then, that you have at least one person, at least one role responsible for it, working for the customer and staying like a long-term engagement, not as a part of, otherwise it becomes just a deliverable. Yes, we did the training, we're done. It doesn't become something that is like a part of the ongoing maintenance of the product. Same application as a test manager. You need a training. You could theoretically have a change manager and then some training beneath that, but still training is ongoing. The most successful ones have that.
Yes, and having an allocated person allows customers, or maybe it almost like forces customers to think about training continuously. Because one of the issues with the D365 implementations is majority of the users have to be trained maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks before go live. But there's tremendous amount of opportunities before that, many months of opportunities to get things going and, getting some things planted and doing some activities. But almost I see a lot of some customers do it, but I think when you have someone responsible from training, their perspective is going to be, what can I do today? What can I do before the project starts? What can I do during design? What can I do during testing? Bringing more people into the fold and using every opportunity for the purpose of training. If I was in that role, that's what I would do. And then that creates that mindset, is that training has to be continuous. We have to do it before project starts, during the project, at go live, and post go live. So then it's really, I think that's hopefully that's the future. That's what I want to see. And that's what I'm advocating for the customers. And it's not important if they buy training from me or somebody else. That just doesn't matter. But what is going to make your project successful are these. How you do it is up to you. Whether or not you in person deliver it or you figure out another way, great, go for it. But it just needs to be in front of your vision, and it needs to be a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to have a very good 365 ambassador working within the organization. I think that particular role, does so much more of like really making use of the product that you actually bought in a better way than just implementing it. I
actually love that, what you said, ambassador. That's absolutely true. It's someone that advocates for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I sort of think also that if we focus the training more on the product rather than the processes, the processes you know anyway, you use them every day, you've used them in AX, they are similar. But if you understand the product, then you actually get users that starts to think for themselves and figure out, is there a smarter way of doing this? Is there a more efficient way of doing this? Which we haven't thought about before, because if you have this step-by-step guide that you adhere to.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the steps is like 200 steps, maybe we need to change this process a bit.
Yeah, and maybe also that once you figure out how the product works, you can actually suggest that, okay, so these 5 steps could probably be automated in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to make it easier and simpler, because the object is not to make it as difficult as possible, rather than the other way around.
Yes.
No.
And I think you make a great point, and I think this is another aspect of training that's a little bit overlooked. The consultant mindset works in a very, very different than someone who is actually working in business doing their job. You know, our perspective, and I've been a consultant myself too, is that our first priority is to configure the system. So, right, we want to configure it, we want to make it working, and we want to have data, and we want to have all of these things. But that perspective can be sometimes not so great when you're actually working with people who are doing a job. You know, that the controller's perspective is very different than maybe a finance consultant's. Controller is worried about numbers, and controller is worried about you know, how numbers are organized. You know, just I'm not going to even use like financial dimensions as a verbiage, but consultants are focused on like, how am I going to set this up to make it work? But you know, I think finding that middle is what makes a project good, right? When you have consultants that really understand the problems of the business, and the business people are able to articulate it, right? So like, how is the controller going to be able to explain something so that we can understand what he's talking about? And that connection can be made so much better with training. Is really just
sorry, and I also think that I mean, if we look at our application specialists at our company, we have basically two different kinds. We have the ones that are more consultants, as you say, more clinical, more tech, more theoretical.
Clinical.
This is how the product works. And then you have people who are more like the people who actually are end users, who understand the challenges of doing a month-end closing, who understand the challenges of managing invoices and things like that. And I think it's important that we understand that as well, because what we need to do, especially with the features. I mean, one of the consultant types can go to the customer and say, you need this feature. Okay, why? Because you need it, because it's really good, because it's new. But if we can't map it to something that we actually do in the business, we can't find the customer gain on it. We can't find the thing that we actually makes us money by using this way of doing it instead. Then there is no point in using it. Then everyone will think all the time that, okay, so Microsoft is just shoving new features down our throat all the time, and we don't want to train our users all the time. But if we have the people that can map this to the business, then we can actually have someone say, but you will earn money by doing this in this certain way. It will be easier, it will be smoother, it will take less work, it will be more efficient, whatever. You will have more control in this way.
Yes, I mean, and isn't that the beauty of the D365 implementation? Because you have these consultants that are product experts, right? We know they know what the product is. They go to a project, but they don't know what the business does, right? Their job, what makes a good consultant, is to quickly understand problems or the business, understand what the business problems are, and be able to take those problems and articulate it in the context of D365. That is expected of consultants, right? A good consultant is supposed to do that when you're a partner. What is not expected, and that's what I'm putting the challenge on the customers, is they have their similar responsibility on their side. They have the business knowledge. Why can't we expect customers to rise up to the same challenge of learning D365? Not to the extent of a consultant. We are not expecting them to, right? But they should be able to learn D365 enough as a part of the process to be able to come to that table, and the knowledge exchange at that point of time is going to be so much more valuable, so much more fruitful for the project. So much rework will be eliminated if the customer upfront understand what the heck the consultants are talking about, right? I mean, they just sit quietly
Yeah, that's music to my ears, and I think that's one observation there is that is much better now. I mean, one thing is the technical thing of being a cloud-based system; it's web-based. People are more used to working with that. It's an easier transition to work in a web-based system which has similarities to Office than working in the old AX client, for instance. So that's a lower threshold for users to come in. And then, like, I'm used to working in a system that looks like this because it kind of looks like Excel in a grid. Basically, that's one thing. And the other is that I think, as you described, a controller, they are people as everyone else. They want, of course, like the base thing is we want it to work, we want the numbers to match, we want the system to be up and running. Like that's a consultant's base deliverable. Everything should work, the numbers should match, it won't break. But then it becomes your day in a life of what you do every day, Monday through Friday. You don't want to come and like get your soul sucked out of you every time you go to work. You want to actually like, yeah, I think this is kind of fun because this is something I do. And that's where really training, testing, everything that makes, because the users in the end, not everyone, but a lot of people, at least from my experience, they want to understand, they want to learn, they want to know how this is a very important tool that they use in their daily life. So training, absolutely, if it's available to them, because I think a lot of the threshold there is like, I'm just going to go to learn, or I'm just going to try to figure out, or maybe check with someone. If it's available to them as part of like an ongoing training, and that's Learn has absolutely evolved a lot. There is a lot of training material that is applicable for users, but like that's not the same thing as actually going and getting. I get a lot of. I'm an architect that I'm supposed to know a lot of things about dynamics, but still, like every session I go to, every training I go to, I get, I didn't know that, because there's so much that you don't know, right? And something that you can put in. And as you say, I can say 1,000 features of the product, perhaps, but they know which one of those actually makes their life better. I don't, in many cases. So exactly what you say. It's a combination of both, but I think it's much better now. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, and I agree. And also, it's almost like as you use it, you're almost like, I feel like your mind space frees up in your mind. You know, like when you go live first, you're like, it's just so focused and maybe nervous, and you're like honed into those basic things that you must do. You know, but then when you're doing it, or you are comfortable with those tasks, now you have you want to know other things, you want to learn things that's going to make things better, and maybe before you would not have understood that before. Maybe a month before you would not have understood, or just you're not evolved to that stage yet. So I think that's why continuous training is going to be instrumental to the future of D365 implementations.
Absolutely. So the classic Maslow stair, because first you need to make sure that everything works. You're not fired. The system produces correct reports. Once you're done with those basic needs, then you can move up the stair and go like, okay, I can maybe do this a little bit better. And then in the end, you discover Power Automate, and then everything is just perfect.
So the Maslow pyramid of dynamics needs.
Yeah, I think I'm going to quote that. Maybe write something about that.
We got lots of quotes on this.
I think that's a good. I think that's a good place to try to wind down a bit. I would just like to thank
before we go into too many psychological models.
Yeah, exactly. I would just start by saying thank you to you, Elif, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
It was really, really nice.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, as usual.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Very nice meeting you, Elif.
Around, hopefully.
Yeah.
Sometime, somewhere.
Yep. Exactly.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Elif. Take care.